Well, hey there, and welcome to episode number 500. Yes, number 500 of Six Pixels of Separation, the Mirum Podcast. My name is Mitch Joel. It's February the 7th, 2016. Let's get on with the show. So, who are you and what do you do?
This is Morgan Spurlock, and I make movies and TV shows and digital shows and things like that.
You make a ruckus.
I try. I feel like if you're making a ruckus, then you're doing your job.
I was trying to think back to when we met, and then it sort of shocked me that we actually connected first in 2010, which seems crazy because it's like we're heading into 6 years, so it's pretty wild. And I'll tell you how we bonded, and you probably do remember this. We were just talking about documentaries and media and stuff, and then I went down the whole sort of nerd thing, not knowing at the time that you were about to release a movie on Comic-Con, and that you and I are both of the same age, but also of the same heavy level of nerddom and comic books,
which happens with when you meet fellow nerd geek comic book freaks, is that suddenly you start talking, you're like, oh my god, you like the same things I do. This is amazing.
It was like a hugging moment.
I thought I was the only one.
So I have to start here with purely no spoiler alerts because we haven't spoken since. What did you think of The Force Awakens?
Oh my gosh, it's so good. I've seen it 3 times now.
I've seen it twice. Yeah.
I saw it opening weekend, and then I took my boy right after that, and then I went and saw it again. It gets better every time. It's one of the greatest things ever.
Yeah, again, with no spoiler alerts, what I'm most interested in, and I'm sure you took this angle too, is there's a sort of creative writing underneath it. And for whatever it's worth, whoever J.J. Abrams was working with, I thought he threaded the needle of the story really, really well. And as I was going into it and hearing things and other things and Kylo Ren and whatever, I was like, is this going to really, and I just thought he connected. It was like Lego to me.
Yeah, no, he did an incredible job of satisfying the nostalgia for Star Wars that I have, the excitement of what Star Wars represents for like my kid, and setting up kind of the next generation of Star Wars fans. I mean, this is a true story. So I was at the opening here in New York City. I was there. The Star Wars comes on the screen. Da, 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 da. The scroll starts, in a galaxy far, far away. Just the chapter starts rolling up the screen. As that starts going up the screen, I start crying. Tears start just streaming down the sides of my face. And I look at my girlfriend. She's like, "Are you crying?" And I was like, "Yes, I'm so happy. I can't tell you how happy I am right now."
And wasn't it a weird cry? For me, it was one of those like, I can't believe I'm crying.
I couldn't believe I was crying. And then somebody said, "Well, did you cry when the first 3 movies came out?" And I was like, absolutely not. It was a very different experience I had when 1, 2, and 3 came out a few years ago versus what this movie kind of, I think, accomplished and represented for me.
Yeah, and and there's no spoiler in this, when the sort of story comes up on that screen too, as it scrolls in the sort of traditional Star Wars branding too, I thought the way he captured even the tone of telling that in the pointed way, that made me like uber emotional. Like I really got all messed up.
Yes, exactly.
So great.
It was amazing. I think he just crushed it. It was such a good movie.
Now I want to elevate that because when we did first meet, and like we talked about earlier, sort of like there's a bonding that happens when you realize that people are the same age and they have the same sort of interest in these obscure things that when you were growing up, nobody in your real geographic area had. What we talked about at that time, which I thought was really interesting, and if I fast forward to 6 years to today, it's even become more powerful, is this idea that geek culture really became mass media. And I mean, wow, talk about like a story between when you and I first started talking about that 6 years ago to today, where 15 new Netflix movies, new shows will be announced, and 9 of them are like based off of Marvel
comics. Right. Well, you got to think back when you were a kid. If you liked comic books, or you liked Iron Man, or you liked Captain America, that was not a cool thing to dig on as a kid. Like back in the 80s when I was like a young teenager, you liked those stuff, but it was a very cliquey thing that you had your kind of comic book friends that you liked that stuff with. And now it is a cool thing to love those movies and like those books and to want to read them and to want to watch them and to get a tattoo of a Flash down your arm or a giant, a Captain America shield on your chest. I mean, there is a badge of honor that comes now with being that type of a geek.
I'll tell you what really sets me off. Like I think back to those times, and even in that moment, like loving the X-Men was like, okay, you're really into comic culture. The fact that there's like a mass populace that is embraced and wants, like the fact that there's an X-Men movie, to me,
Yeah.
every single day I can wake up and go, oh, look at this iPhone technology where it's basically Star Wars and Star Trek in my pocket. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh my God, there's an X-Men movie. To me, that's even more mind-blowing than the iPhone.
Are you kidding me? It's more mind-blowing that there's an Ant-Man movie. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, the fact that they have kind of generated films around what are essentially big fringe characters and created or are starting to create franchises around them is phenomenal. I think that it's the power of what Marvel has done, I think, to kind of turn their brand into a mass market brand. I think it's the partnerships they've created, one through the sale to Disney and also with the partnership with Netflix. And it's just going to keep growing. And I think that the possibilities are endless for them.
So why is DC struggling? Is this a story thing? Purely story thing?
I don't think it's purely a story thing. I think Marvel was very smart early on to set up the universe. I think that they came in and they had a real plan of action of saying, we're going to do this film, we're going to do this film. I mean, I think they had a roadmap of what they wanted to accomplish. And I feel like DC was so about one-offs. They kind of bifurcated their universe by doing a deal with Sony for Spider-Man, doing a deal with Fox for X-Men. I mean, they kind of sold off pieces, and so it's harder to create unification around that, where Marvel didn't do that. And I think I think they've created something infinitely more valuable, and now DC is starting to find its place. I mean, I think the real telltale sign is going to be what happens on the heels of Batman versus Superman, because this is the creation of the Justice League. It's the two of them together. They bring in Wonder Woman. I mean, it looks awesome, and so I feel like that could be the thing that kind of starts the domino for them of really having a bigger franchise.
I'm walking on that sort of that tight wire where one part of me is like, I could tumble right and it could be awesome, but I could totally tumble left and go, oh my God, what happened here? So yeah.
And I think, on the heels of such a massive success as Star Wars: The Force Awakens, I mean, it's a few months away still, so they won't quite still be in the shadow. But that's a big looming successful shadow that they have to kind of break out of in a couple months.
You're an individual, at least from my outside perception of you, where you start. I think you received more attention in terms of the sort of video documentary movie.
Yeah.
Obviously, TV has brought you to a very large audience, and I think dramatically so with what you've been doing with CNN for sure. But you're also a guy, because we're of the same generation, that has really embraced this idea of technology and all of this. But I do think that right now, if I think of this moment in time, I'm really interested in what your perspective is on streaming, because streaming to me has really created, from the consumer standpoint, a new consumer, right? Consumers used to buy media. I buy a ticket to a movie, I buy the DVD, I buy the CD, I download it, and I physically have it on a drive or wherever it might be.
Yes.
Streaming has shifted the paradigm where they're paying for access, not ownership.
Right.
And when they pay for access, not ownership, as you know, like my whole joke is we used to on a Friday night have dinner and then go to Blockbuster, and you'd like go up and down these aisles and nothing was in, and you'd go home with nothing.
That's right.
And now we sit in hotel rooms on Netflix and we actually don't choose anything because we have analysis paralysis. There's too much to choose from.
That I completely agree with you. I mean, I think there's two sides to this. I think from a digital standpoint, and my first company that I started, after I started working in the industry back in 2000, I started a production company that the whole idea was we're going to launch content online, use it as a springboard to kind of pilot programming. So we're going to do these short pieces of content. If they work, we sell them to TV or film, and if they don't, we just do something else. And so we created this show called I Bet You Will, which became the first show to go from the web to television back in 2000. We ended up selling it to MTV and doing 53 episodes of this show for MTV. But at that time, it was kind of all the glory of radio, but with still images. Like unless you had somebody who had a magical connection, you'd get this streaming audio that the video would sometimes play, or it would take forever to load to watch 3 minutes of content. And it just took a long time for kind of the broadband revolution to happen. So that's when we started focusing back more on traditional media. Where you are now, which is like the promise that Reed Hastings has made that, finally 15 years after he launched Netflix, everybody was going to be watching streaming content online, has happened.
But
It's
it wasn't.
amazing.
It's not even that. Like Cisco, if I go back like to my sort of nerdy world of Cisco and
Yeah.
Oracle, they always said that the tipping point for internet media was going to be when they could deliver video. And if you
Yes.
were watching whatever it is, Netflix or whatever, and it looked the same as TV, that to them was the tipping point. And again, by
Yeah.
all intents and purposes, we've now hit that moment.
And I feel like and so now what you have is there's an appreciation, I think, for some production content, production value that is starting to kind of just be passed away. We've become incredibly forgiving of bad content online because it's all about story. If shit looks bad on YouTube, it doesn't matter. I'm still going to watch it because if there's a great story mechanism or a great person, somebody relaying it to me, somebody hand holding a camera, bouncing around, doesn't bother me. Also, but what you're seeing now is people who are watching these great big giant movies. Like I was on a train one day and I saw a kid watching Gladiator on his cell phone, and I was like, "You're watching this incredibly epic film on a screen that's like 3 inches wide."
Right.
But so for me, I think that there's a cross collateralization of content right now that is both good and bad for the business, and I'll explain why I think that is. One is, as somebody who creates content. And I'm also somebody who's also very pro-piracy, because if you're going to take the time to download a documentary and share it with someone, then God bless you. It's
Right.
like you can pirate that thing all day long, share it with as many friends as you want. Now, granted, I'm not making like Avatar, Star Wars, these movies that cost hundreds of millions of dollars, where once something gets pirated, it becomes a real problem. I think that where you are right now from a profit standpoint is through streaming and through the subscription model. It's the same reason Taylor Swift said, people are getting screwed over by the record business. This is now starting to transition into the content business, because you may get paid a vig by a Hulu or by a Netflix where you get a 30% upside to your content piece that you make, but you're never going to see any other money beyond that. So it is basically all these kind of glorified bonus work for hire, opportunities, which are awesome because you reach huge audiences. Like more people have seen the work I've made via Netflix than probably anywhere else right now. It's
Right.
incredible. But the idea for it to be a larger profit center starts to diminish through a subscription model.
So there's also the art side of it. Like when you are creating, I know that you are sophisticated enough that you're actually thinking the output of this is going to be seen on this type of device, screen, etc.
Yeah.
And I'm saying that to you because there is a counter to that. The counter to that is, the interview I just heard on Howard Stern with Quentin Tarantino, where it's like, a little bit of the Quentin Tarantino and everybody dies every time you don't watch a movie in 70 millimeter or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And while I can appreciate the artistry of what Quentin's trying to do, I often, it's almost like Neil Young with his, Podio, whatever it was called, that music player thing, where it's like, you can't be that disconnected from the audience that actually has already voted to not go to that theater, or the ones that have. You just have to understand your film is not going to do that well because most people just don't have that in them anymore, and it's going to just be for the purists.
Or there are movies that you want to go see in that experience, because
Exactly.
there is still a cinematic experience that nothing is like. I mean, there is the movie theater is a temple. It's where you go to worship this magical image and have experiences in a group format that you can't get anywhere else. And I couldn't imagine watching Star Wars by myself in my house. I mean, it would have been the most depressing thing ever. You want to have those types of group experiences because there is an energy, there's an excitement. And there's big movies like that, like The Revenant or like Hateful Eight, that were created for that type of experience. You have a movie like Room, which is an incredible film, but it's such a small, intimate piece. Do I need to pay to see Room in a movie theater, or can I see that on demand or streaming and have just as valuable and impactful and emotional experience as I would seeing it there? I think what you lose the minute you start watching things at home or streaming is the immersion of getting lost in a story. Mm-hmm. And as a filmmaker and as a purist, I mean, I think that I am still very much in line with that, because the minute you're in a movie theater, you're not checking your phone. You're not going to get the laundry out. You're not going to the kitchen to get a snack. You start to have a very passive relationship with content when you're watching it in those places. You will pause it. You'll do something else and then come back. Whereas when you're in a movie theater, you're enraptured in a moment and in an experience that can't be replicated.
But genres die. I think I still I don't disagree with that, but I feel like rom-coms, comedies, even to a certain degree documentaries, it's like that, because that goes away from that experience, and people are like, yeah, but I don't need to have that in the theater for that it hurts everybody, which is I've been reading a lot of this lately, especially where like what are the big blockbusters? Of course, they're going to be the Star Wars of the world, but the
That's right.
problem now is that how do you sustain an industry where it's only going to be 5 movies a year that can do that?
Yeah, and the hard part is as somebody who makes small independent films and documentary films, is you're fighting against the bigger movies constantly. There was a time there was a couple things that happened that were awesome for the filmmaking process, and the first one, which enabled me to make a film like Super Size Me, was there was a massive democratization of cinema that happened. Back in right around 2000, where suddenly like a prosumer video camera. It looked good. It didn't look as video-y or as kind of artifacty as it used to. You could blow it up to 35 millimeter and you could pull it off, passing as film. People were a bit more forgiving of things looking bad. And I think that democratization of cinema, where suddenly anybody with a camera and a computer and a good idea could make a film, was a game changer. So now suddenly you were able to broaden out the possibility of independent film to such a larger audience. It was incredible. What didn't happen during that same time is they weren't building more movie theaters. They weren't building more places for these movies to be seen. So now you have 10 times as many people competing for the exact same screen space. And what happens then is now theater owners, they'll give you a shot, but they're going to give you a much smaller shot to be successful. And if you don't come in and knock it out of the park the first weekend where they'll really want to expand the movie, you're done. It'll be 1 week and done. And you're seeing more and more movies now that come out for a weekend who do their 1 week run and then they're pulled from theaters or they're marginalized down to one screen in one town. Whereas there was a time when kind of the Sony Classics model or the Focus Features model, if you're going to really platform a movie out, was the norm. Now to have movies that do that is they're just fewer and farther between, and it's harder to get those movies that work in that way.
So you mentioned Super Size Me, and of course, I think it was the blockbuster that really brought your name and the sort of style that you were going for into a much larger audience. It definitely was the introduction of me to your content. And I always loved that. I loved people who could take societal issues, weave them in with something interesting to make it accessible, to have humor, to have a political, like you really were touching on a lot of things and it made a statement. And such a statement, I think, where a lot of people went, like, ooh, Morgan's taking on a very large corporation here. Like, this is something. And it was branded. It wasn't like fast food. You went specifically after McDonald's.
Yeah.
What I find really fascinating and really want to spend the bulk of my time talking to you about, because I think my audience is most interested too, is how you evolved. Because you went from that to the greatest movie ever sold, to the Comic-Con one, and there's stuff in the middle for sure, and then to the One Direction. And now you're in this world of content branded, content crafted. I'm going to talk about all of that, but have you done a 180? Have you turned a corner? Have you recognized where this commercialization comes from and why the advertising / marketing side? Like, what was it? Like, was there an awakening for you, or are you just like, hey, I'm just going on this path? I don't know.
Well, I think the biggest thing is I think you have to be reactive as a business owner, period. And you have to kind of be able to pivot and adjust as to where financing is coming from or kind of where audiences are going. That's why the ability for us to be able to produce movies for theaters or television or TV shows for television or digital or straight streaming digital content, we're very nimble and have the ability to react to a bunch of different things and produce for a variety of platforms. And there's stories that should be 90 minutes. There's stories that should be an hour. There's stories that should be a half hour. There's stories that are best suited for being,
Snapchat.
Or less. That's right. Or Snapchat. That's right. And so I think that, for us, we've been able to kind of cross-produce over multiple places. And I think that's a big thing. And I think on the heels of Super Size Me, starting there, I had a real epiphany after I made that film. It wasn't a film that I, not only was I excited about the reception because, the film exploded out of Sundance. It changed my life forever. But simultaneously, I made something that actually started to have a cultural impact, a societal impact. Right. And that reward felt good. When you make something that actually creates a conversation and can drive change, that's as a filmmaker, to be that type of filmmaker, it was something you dream of. You dream of things having that type of an impact. And I said, if I can make content that can start a conversation, that can have a societal impact, that can engage people in a different way, that's a place I want to be. And so, we did that with our show 30 Days that we did for FX. We're doing that with our show for CNN. But what we've also been able to do, because since we've been able to take like these tough societal questions and commercialize them, make them more popular and populist, where more people will watch them than normally would, we kind of put ourselves, myself and my company, in a position of being somebody who can kind of walk that line. I can walk that line between doing something serious. I can walk that line between doing something comedic and commercial. And that's the reason why, there are a couple things that I think really changed the path of our company in a good way, or at least opened the door. I don't think it changed the path, but it gave us more opportunity. The first was I got a phone call from the folks who produced The Simpsons, and they asked us to do the 20th anniversary special for Fox, which was huge. So now suddenly, not only do we make documentaries, but we make things that are incredibly commercial. And then when we got a call, a few years later to do the One Direction film, something else, to do a big, giant $13 million studio film that is a documentary is it's rarefied air in this space. Yeah. So I think that just those two things kind of put us in very unique positions to do more than I think a normal or a typical documentarian would get to do.
So take the company out of it and talk to me as Morgan. What about the moral thing? Because you started, and I was a fan of your work.
Sure.
There was this moral thing, and I'm not saying it eroded or went away, but clearly your belief system evolved personally.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't think my belief system evolved. I think you can do well and do good at the same time. I think you can fight windmills and fight the good fight on a daily basis, but at the same time, ultimately, we have a business, and I believe that we can do content and produce TV shows and movies that are made to tell great stories, but you can also have upside on that enable you to do more of the things where you can fight against the wrongs of society. It's hard to. The way things are, as you talked about the breakdown of the documentary business right now. I mean, the highest grossing doc of 2015, I don't think broke $5 million. So I think that you're seeing kind of the profit center of the things that the profit center of those types of projects where you're going after some sort of ill in the world become harder because you can't continually run a business on them. And so for us, we said, how can we bifurcate our business in a way that enables us to continue to do the things that we believe in and fight those good fights while also having a business?
And I don't think that you were ever like sort of skeptical of brands. I think there was a lot of sort of media when the greatest movie.
No, I think brands were much more skeptical of me.
Well, that's my point. Well, that was my point. And not only that, but I felt like everybody in the room, and again, I saw a lot of the clips because we hung out at that TED Talk that you gave as well. We were showing sort of the backstory to that movie. And I remember the audience being very aghast. You got a standing ovation. I was in the audience. I remember. Yeah. And my reaction internally, because I'm a marketing agency guy, was I think what Morgan is doing is trying to show the audience how the audience themselves don't realize how much this messaging is impacting what they consume, which to me is like the most massive, important thing, especially in a world where everybody's a media channel on Facebook or LinkedIn or wherever they might be.
Well, and also in a room like that, how much power those guys have. I mean, ultimately, when you control a brand like that, and I love brands. I love the Levi's of the world. I love the Guinnesses of the world. Like these are things that these are brands that you're loyal to. And that ultimately those are brands that have the power to not only influence, but to put out content in a way that a loyal audience will want to watch it and follow it and be a part of it. And they can drive conversations. They can drive a narrative. And it's not, and I think and this thing is, if you go back to when we made Greatest Movie Ever Sold, which now that's been 5-6 years ago, the world has changed dramatically in that time. It's phenomenal. That now brands are realizing the power of producing content that isn't about selling a widget and putting their products into it. It's about a narrative. It's about how do we tell a great story. And if I can tell a great story that people like, that people watch, there's no difference in me paying for it than Fox TV paying for it or Paramount Pictures paying for it. It's a great story. And I think you're seeing more brands that are now brave enough to, one, kind of let go of their IP in a way where they will let creative people do what they do best, which is, tell great stories. And they're very much on board to go along for that ride and be a part of that process.
So this is the part where I love, because obviously I'm a storytelling guy and all I do every day is fight with
Yeah.
clients and
Yeah.
brands. And when I talk on stage about, do the things that I'm saying, which are basically the same things that you're saying.
Yeah.
And so you go from this place of documenting
Yeah.
how names, sponsorships, advertising, the effects on media from Sao Paulo, where they banned, they were literally
Oh,
banned
God.
outdoor advertising, to
Incredible.
schools who are embracing advertising to have some sort of sustainable revenue.
Yeah.
But then you actually start going down the road of branded content. And the reason I'm sort of pointing is, tell me one or two of the things that I know, but that you've worked on, because I think that when people talk like, oh, I want a case study, I'm like, man, Morgan Spurlock has got case studies out the wazoo, because the work you've done to date on brands to me has been amazing.
No, thanks.
So, I mean, I don't know if it's GE or what you were doing.
Well, GE's a big one because GE, on the heels of you and I meeting, was also when I met the folks from GE. And I met Beth Comstock at
Yep.
TED, and she talked about, she's like, we want to do more creative producing. We want to do stuff like this. So it was she and I and Jack Myers had a sit down conversation at TED, and I said, let us come back and sit down with you in New York City. We came back to New York and had a meeting, and out of that meeting came, because ultimately they said this was right. It was two sides. One, it was right when it was right after GE was being seen as a corporation that didn't pay their taxes.
I was going to say, you're being very kind. They were getting killed in the media.
They were getting crushed by everyone for not paying their taxes, which they rightfully should. As a multi-billion-dollar company who didn't pay taxes, they should have been eviscerated in the press. But they said, we're also an innovative company, which is true. They are an innovative company. And they said, we want to show people how innovative we are. We want to show all this technology we've created. And I was like, nobody wants to see that. Nobody wants to hear about your MRI machines and watch that. And so we had a real kind of above board conversation with Beth Comstock and Judy Hugh, Andy Goldberg, the folks there, and said, why don't you show everyone else around the world all of these people who kind of embody what GE stands for, these people who are innovative in education and technology and science and architecture. And so we created this film series called GE Focus Forward, which, they underwrote, they helped us blow out to the world. It was a 15-month release period where we premiered them at Sundance, and then a year later gave away the largest cash prize to a short filmmaker in the history of short films, where somebody won $100,000 for making a short film. But we made these 30 short films by all of these great A-list doc filmmakers, Alex Gibney, Barbara Koppel. It was fantastic. And these movies were beautiful. They're inspiring. Ross Kaufman, who won the Academy Award for Born into Brothels, made one of the most powerful movies you'll ever see, called Fire with Fire, which is amazing. It's about the work that they're doing at UPenn, where they're using the HIV virus. They've stripped out the ability for it to cause AIDS or HIV, and they're using it now. They've reprogrammed it to go in and basically kill cancer cells. Yeah. And you watch this movie and you start crying. It's so impactful, and it's 3 minutes long. Every single one of these movies was 3 minutes. And I think that what we created with that, with a brand, was huge. It's now had, I think that film series has something like 75, 80 million views more, I think, around the world. And it was one of those where the brand was skeptical in the beginning, and then once they realized if they let go a little bit, the possibilities were endless, and that's exactly what happened. And I think that they were incredibly brave to do that, and it is a hard thing, especially for big legacy brands. And that's the thing, big legacy brands are harder to convince to take chances like this because they're so risk averse. Smaller brands, a lot easier. But like a big brand like this, I mean, it took balls for them to want to say, let's do it, and it paid off. The film series is phenomenal.
So now walk me down the road, because if you move to present tense, I know a lot of this stuff, again, we've been talking about is how the ability to do this in terms of cost accessibility has dropped. So here we were talking about GE, many great filmmakers, everybody listening is like, cost, I can't afford that. But now you've moved the bar in a very different direction, as others have as well. Talk a little bit about that sort of more scrappy thing you could do now.
Well, I feel like the ability is on the heels of kind of the democratization of cinema that we talked about earlier, there was the next step was this incredible democratization of distribution, where, suddenly anybody, once you made it now with your camera, computer, and your good idea, now you could put it out to everywhere. I didn't have to sell it to Sony. I didn't have to put it in a Lowe's theater or a Regal Cinemas. I could get it out. I didn't have to sell it to television. I could put it up online. I could put it on Vimeo. I could put it on YouTube. I could put it on Facebook. Suddenly you could reach an audience that wasn't there before, so long as you could motivate that audience to come see it. So from my standpoint, what happened next was super exciting. Now the problem is I make this incredible piece of content. It's like if I show a movie in the woods and no one watches it, did anybody see my movie in the woods? I don't know. That's where you are. So the next step of this, which I think is huge, and this is kind of where we're pushing now, is kind of the democratization of marketing, or the democratization of curation. Like, this is the next thing, is like, how do I now let people know that this thing is here? And that will be the next big piece that I think solves a lot of problems for independent filmmakers and independent storytellers who are wanting to kind of continue to live and work outside of that system.
Amazing. And so the other story that I think is so good is the crafted story. Can we talk a little bit about?
Yeah, sure.
Tell me a bit about where that started, where it came from.
Yeah, so we were contacted. I'm repped by CAA, the Creative Artists Agency, who they rep brands as well as people like myself, companies like mine. And so they were contacted by Ketchum, who Ketchum works with Haagen-Dazs. And they said, we have this project where Haagen-Dazs wants to, make a film about this, their new artisanal ice cream line. And they said, would you meet with them? I was like, listen, I love Haagen-Dazs. Of course I will. And then we sat down and met with them. And I said, why make a film about ice cream? I said, why do you want to do that? I said, let's go back to the idea of these amazing artisans. Like, if you're the people who make the stuff that's in there, there's artisans all around the world who take months to make one thing. I said, why don't we make a film about them? We don't have any ice cream in this. It's not about that. It's much more about an alignment of ideologies. And they're like, that's exactly what we want to make. And they gave us kind of free reign to run off and tell this story about these really inspiring people, the guys from Bloodroot Blades in Georgia, the folks.
These guys make it's kitchen knives, or
these guys make some of the most beautiful kitchen knives. When we made the film, the wait list was about a year and a half. I think the wait list now is 2.5 years if you order a knife from them. But they're beautiful. They're all completely handmade. They make about 350, 375 knives a year. Like, it is an incredibly low number. It's about one a day that they make. And it's fantastic. So, from them to Nagatani Inn in Iga, Japan, where they create all of this beautiful handmade Danabi pottery that you cook in. It was just a very powerful, beautiful movie that I think, again, it's like, once the brand kind of said, we want to tell a great story, we're going to work with a great storyteller to tell that story. We're going to be there to give feedback and to give our 2 cents. We'll brand it with our brand identity, but not kind of infiltrate it with our product. Makes all the difference in the world. Now it's about great stories rather than great selling.
So this is, and there's a word that you didn't use that I'm curious about how you made it happen. Because if I were to separate the things that were happening, it's like, okay, Morgan Spurlock's over here, Haagen-Dazs is over there, Bloodroot Blades is over here.
Yeah,
we're going to put them all together. It's like, it sounds like a headache. But what I think actually happened...
Are you going to say synergy?
No,
it's all about synergy.
No, I was going to actually use a nicer word. I was going to say fit. I think that fit is like this thing that most brands, agencies don't understand, that it's about the fit. And the fit really was that vision of, okay, but what's the core of the brand? It's this idea of this is a craft. Yeah. And I'm always stymied by the fact that, it almost goes back to the greatest movie ever sold, where it's just easier to say Palm Wonderful.
Right.
It's like, let me just buy the thing.
Which Linda Resnick still sends me Christmas cards and Christmas packages every year.
As well as she should, because it is success and it's stuck.
Here, I'll tell you a quick side story about Palm Wonderful, because it's something that I think that your listeners are going to dig. So when we were making that film, we were selling the above the title sponsorship for Greatest Movie Ever Sold, officially titled Palm Wonderful Presents the Greatest Movie Ever Sold, for $1 million. Right. And so we went and met with Palm. We pitched it to them. Palm said, we love it. We started negotiating with them on benchmarks of when we get paid the money, at which points. And so they said, rather than us pay you the money, what if we just paid you a percentage on media impressions? Like, what if we just paid you a fraction of a cent per media impression? So it basically broke down where they were going to pay us 1/10 of 1 penny per media impression. which and this was early on in the negotiation process with them, and I was like, you know what, we have to get the money in the bank. We need the money to make the movie. Let's just get the money, bird in the hand. And it's one of those where there's times when you want to bet on yourself to continue just to move forward because you believe in your idea, you believe in your vision, and it's worth it. There's times when you need to take the money to physically pay for production or overhead or whatever you need to do. So this was one of those moments where we had to take the money to physically finish the film. And had we been able to just do the deal that they wanted, because by the time the movie premiered at the Sundance Film Festival, leading out, it hadn't even premiered at Sundance yet, but leading up to, and I talk about this in my TED Talk, we had 900 million media impressions before the movie even premiered at Sundance.
Right.
6 months later, by the time the movie had done its full run in the United States, we'd had over 5 billion media impressions, and it hadn't even kind of gone out around the world. So this was just domestic. It was 5 billion domestic, international, 5 billion media impressions. And so had we taken that deal, just by the time we finished kind of the first U.S. run, we'd have made $5 million from them off of that. Had we agreed to that. But it's those are hard choices. And as you're working with brands, there are ways to do really creative financing, impactful negotiations that are both good for you and good for the brands, where you can see much more attractive upside. And brands are still willing to take those chances if they feel like it can deliver. But you also have to be in a position where you can sacrifice a little up front to potentially see better upside.
So let's pull the sidebar back to the concept of fit. So now you're in a place where I know you've been very, very proactive in terms of being public about the fact that you've got this branded content, you've got this content marketing, that you want to sit down and have these, it's the type of work you want to do.
Absolutely.
Is that on top of this sort of documentary societal thing, or do you see that as we're going to integrate these worlds? How are you balancing?
No, I mean, we're still doing movies that have social impact, still distributing movies that have social impact. We just released a film that was that we thought was going to get shortlisted for an Academy Award called Becoming Bulletproof, this beautiful movie that now people will be able to see. It's premiering on Showtime in the next couple months, and then will be out everywhere. But, we still have this real, I think, social good side of what we make and what we distribute and what we produce, both for film and television. And this is just a great complement to our business. Brands know that we have the ability to produce great content, produce buzzworthy content, have those types of conversations. Like we just did this thing that we did completely on spec called Call Bullshit. And if you go to callbullshit.org, you'll see it. This is something that we did with a company called Interlude, which has an incredibly, I think, just elegant, interactive app where you can interact with the content while you watch it. And so Call Bullshit we did for 2 of the Republican debates, 1 of the Democratic debates, and now we're going to roll this out with a sponsor going into 2016, where as debates continue, you'll have the ability as an American to call bullshit on what the candidates are saying, which is, I think, a great way to continue to have that conversation we should be having as citizens going into the election, but at the same time could be supported by a brand who's like, that's exactly what we want to do. We want to be able to pull back the curtain and call bullshit on things. So you're
saying in a playful way, but it's actually a pretty cool thing, right? The video's going, you hit the button, and it actually, there's a fact checking, there's a whole, it's a very interesting thing that's happening on this thing.
Yeah, and I think that the ability to now have brands be willing to push that envelope is exciting. So I think that the idea of integrating both into the same world is happening in real time for us. And so there's stuff that we'll produce for brands that is still much more kind of just straight branded produced content. There's kind of the social interest side of the stuff that we'll still make independently. But then I think there's this great bridge between these two worlds where you can collide and come together to make really, I think, something unique, impactful, and noisy.
Taking risks has been a huge part of everything you do. In fact, even in your TED Talk, you talk about how you should. Do you see when you move to the brand side that, wow, they actually are understanding they have to take more risks? Or do you actually look at it and go, well, they still have a long way to go? Because, that was part of the joke of the movie. It was the fact that nobody wanted to take, well, what are you going to say about our brand? That was the real theme of it.
Yeah. And I think that's still a reality. I think I touched on this before. I think, but legacy, the bigger the brand, the harder the sell.
Right.
I think it's harder to convince bigger brands. Smaller brands, more nimble brands aren't as risk averse. They are willing to take some chances because they're scrappy. They're usually, they have more younger people there. When we were making Greatest Movie Ever Sold, every time I get pushed up to the CMO, and I from ad agencies to product placement companies to brands, I spoke to probably in total 900 companies over the course of this. of which my success rate was just under 2%. So for every 100 brands I would call, 98 would say no, 2 would say yes. So that's a very small success rate.
Not in my business, it's not. Go on.
But I feel like that's the norm. I feel like that's the norm for the brand, and it's probably a little better now for brands and branded content. But I would speak to these CMOs, and the CMOs would say no, and I'd go back down to the junior people, and the junior folks would say, "Oh, I can't believe he said no," or "I can't believe she said no." They said, "Wow, I thought for sure they'd go for it." Listen, I'll do anything I can to help you that won't get me fired. Mm-hmm. And so all of these folks who really kind of believed in this idea and this mission and this message of you can create smart branded content that that isn't a detriment to the brand, they were on board with. And I think that it's still an ongoing task of having to convince a lot of these people, but more and more are seeing the value.
Well, that's the thing too. Like I don't even know if it's the value so much as the reality of, like, in a world of BuzzFeed and Vice and all the things.
And no one watching commercials, and like 30-second commercials are dying. Like I fast forward through them every night on my DVR, so it's like I don't know who's watching those.
And TrueView, right? It's like we're going to put our commercial in front, as a bumper for a YouTube video. Why? Like, take the brand and do something that's going to stop somebody for 2 seconds before they hit skip this ad.
That's right. That's right.
But the attitude, but I do feel like brands are being forced into it, much in the same way they were like brands were like, oh, social media, we get to speak to customers. How lovely. They were dragged into it kicking and screaming.
Yes.
And I think this is it too. Yeah.
Yeah. And some of them still are.
It's an amazing thing. I'm also curious about CNN.
Yeah,
I'm curious about it because I'm such an infovore and I love media so much. And the move of CNN to move into this sort of more mass entertainment-based content, to me, has been really fascinating. Like, really watching them transition from the news desk 24/7 to shows and content and bringing people like you in.
Yeah.
What's that like when you are the person that you are with the pedigree that you have, going into this, not only because it's CNN transforming, but because there's an expectation now that it's going to be the Morgan Spurlock brand helping such a mega brand transform its own image, because that's what they're trying to do here.
Well, I also think it's twofold. I think it's one, it's also them validating a lot of the work that we do. Now it's validated. What we do is investigative journalism. It's incredibly entertaining and accessible, but at the same time, it has real journalistic integrity and value. And I think that was the smart thing that Zucker did when he came in. And so Bourdain and I were the first 2 shows kind of off the ground with their kind of new experiment of doing this. And in a world where long form investigative journalism is going the way of the dodo, I think for CNN to say, how do we invest in that type of programming, but in a different way, that it's driven by a personality or driven by a different storyteller, was smart. And I think that what they've been able to do is kind of bring back this idea of investigative journalism in a different way, that isn't just the way Frontline does it or Dateline does it or 60 Minutes does it, but I think in a much more kind of commercially savvy and commercially accessible manner. And I think it's brilliant. I think what he's done and the way that network has turned around over the last few years, just from a viewership standpoint, where they're still number one for breaking news. When breaking news happens, you go to CNN. It's just the people respect and expect that from them. And I think for us to kind of be a part of that new pie it's fantastic. And they've been really supportive of us.
And I'm being really naive here because I don't know how your show or others like it have been performing. Are they seeing the transformation? Like, are the results positive where they're like, let's keep going? Or
it's positive. No, it's positive. We just delivered our 4th season of Inside Man for CNN. Thanks. Yeah, it's awesome. And so we've seen our numbers go up every single year from the season. So now not only are people watching it, more people are coming to watch it. A lot of that is also a huge credit to Netflix, where seasons 1, 2, and 3 are now available on Netflix, because now people are discovering it there and are being driven back to CNN to see the new live episodes when they come out. So I think that's the exciting part about the post-distribution model of a place like CNN, who then outputs through a Netflix, where more people have access to that type of content.
You have such a healthy attitude towards it. It's funny because I know, like, I'm that way too. I'm like, oh, look, I've done 500 podcasts, and if I can put them now on SoundCloud or on YouTube, and more people find this show I did with Morgan months ago, like, what do I care? Like, I'm always fascinated by things like radio. It's like you have all these interviews with all these amazing people that if you weren't in your car at that exact moment, are in some dusty archive somewhere. Why not free? Because then people, it's amazing that content creators really want that toll to click every time the view is there.
That's right.
It's crazy.
It's crazy. And I think that the one thing that we've just continued to try to do is, as a content creator, you want people to interact with the content. You want people to listen to your podcast. I want people to see my movies and TV shows. You want it out there in the universe. And anything I can do to drive that audience, to get it in front of those people, to get people talking about it, is more important, because that will drive more content. The more people see it, the more people watch it, the more people talk about it, the more opportunities I have to produce more. I mean, the greatest thing you can do as an artist is to continue to create art, not sit around and wait for people to talk about your art.
It's amazing. Last area that I'm curious about is you and your weirdness.
What are you trying to say?
Exactly. I'm trying to say that we are very similar in the sense of we both really enjoy strange and weird things. And the connection that sort of made my eyebrow raise the other day is I saw the article about you, authentic brands, and there's, I don't know if it's happening or not, this idea of maybe a Juicy Couture.
Well, they're an awesome company and an amazing thing, because now they've basically become a holding company for brands.
Right.
Like they'll buy the IP. So not only have they bought the IP of companies like Juicy Couture or Spider or Above the Rim, but they've also bought the IP of people like Muhammad Ali, Marilyn Monroe, Elvis Presley, Shaquille O'Neal. So I think that, from our standpoint of being a content producer and content creator, and they reached out to us. It was interesting. We got cold called by their CMO, who said, "I love what you do. Can we have a conversation?" And then once we started talking about the opportunity of creating content around all of their IP, we realized there was something really unique there and special. And I think that over the next year, you're going to see some cool stuff come out of that partnership.
But the weird part, do you, when you look at a sort of a pedigree of brands like that, are you like, there has to be something that will raise that eyebrow, that will make people say, like, Morgan's going to do a documentary about Juicy Couture. Like, I think you sort of thrive on that.
I don't know if I'm going to do a documentary about Juicy Couture, right. But we are going to do some cool stuff with the folks they represent.
But is that weird thing again? Is that something where is it a note thing? It's just your perspective of the world. Is it a curiosity? Because you feed it. Like I know that you feed that part of you, that characteristic.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I feel like now it's to the point where I feel like I'm at a place in my career where, it's like now I don't have a job, I actually have a career. So now I feel like I don't have to be in a position of having to explain things. I feel like people are at the point now where they're like, of course he's doing that. Of course he did a deal with them. It's like he made that other movie. He made Greatest Movie Ever Sold. Of course he's going to do a deal with that brand company to create content with them. Right. So I think that, what we've been able to do is, and which is great, it puts us in a unique and rare slot, is that we can now identify positions and partnerships in ways that I think a lot of other companies haven't been able to do or can't do, just because of whether they don't have the infrastructure or they don't kind of have the track record. But we're in a unique place where we can live in all of those worlds in a way that is beneficial.
So, and my last question is, do you look at things like specific channels and go like, what's the thing here? Like, are you one of those guys where it's like, okay, I got to figure out the Snapchat thing. Okay, this thing with Twitch, it's really out of control that people are spending hundreds of thousands of hours watching other people play video games. What's that thing? Do you like live and breathe in that? Or are you a bit sort of like, I know of it and I'm on the
I'm a total technophile. So it's like the minute I hear about things and I start reading about them. I mean, I'm in quick. Like I was in Twitch early, just trying to understand what it was all about. As a kid and a child and a student in life of video game culture in that world, it was something that I was completely enamored by. My kid who will sit and watch people play Minecraft videos for hours on end. Just this, I wanted to get a better sense of where this comes from. And you think back, like when you and I were growing up and we would stand in an arcade and watch people play Pac-Man who were really good at Pac-Man, or watch people play Donkey Kong who would kick the shit out of Donkey Kong. This is that same thing, just in a different environment. So
it's distributed in its scale.
It's distributed in scale. Yeah, where now anybody in the world can watch this guy kick ass on Donkey Kong, or whatever game he's playing. I think that's just what's happened. And so where people are like, I don't get it, and I was like, I totally get it, because I was the guy who was standing there over that guy's shoulder. But now it's just a much larger shoulder. So for me, I love that, and seeing how technology is not only changing my side of the business, but changing the world as a whole. I think it's exciting.
Morgan, I can't thank you enough for taking the time. I really can't thank you enough for the body of work you create. I really, and it has impacted our society in such a great and positive way. I know I'm
Thank
going to see you in our protein form soon, so I'm looking forward to that.
you. Me too.
Let people know where they can at least get a perspective of where all your stuff is. Like, where's the best place to connect with you online?
Best place, to connect and follow me online is, on Twitter, it's at Morgan Spurlock. My Instagram, which is at Morgan Spurlock NYC, through Facebook, or on Snapchat. Which on Snapchat, it's you can search my name, but it's under Mahoosier is my tag.
You and DJ Khalid.
That's right, exactly.
Thanks so much for your time, Morgan.
My pleasure. Have a great day. Thank you.